Hi everyone, I'm Abigail. This is Josh, and welcome to another Two Kids interview. Today, we are joined by New York Times best-selling and Newbery Honor author Lauren Wolk. Ms. Wolk's books include My Own Lighting, Echo Mountain, Beyond the Bright Sea, and her Newbery Honor best-selling book is Wolf Hollow. She has her next book coming out on April 22nd, Candle Island. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me today, Abigail and Josh. It is a true pleasure.
Do you feel there's a freedom to writing that lets people be the best version of themselves?
Well, I couldn't have said it better. That is absolutely true for me. Everybody has something that lets them be the best version of themselves, sometimes more than one thing, if they're lucky. And writing is one of the biggest for me, maybe the biggest. And yes, freedom is a huge part of that.
It seems your books are very personal to you, and their settings inspired by your life.
That's
How
absolutely true.
How important is that to you, and how do you feel that it helps your writing?
It's incredibly important. I can already tell by the questions you're asking what incredible, amazing readers you are, and I suspect writers as well. I rely very heavily on setting, and I rely on settings that I know extremely well from my own life. I don't think I could write a good book without knowing how a place looks, feels, smells, tastes, and sounds, and not just from a glancing blow, but from spending real time in places like the farm in Western Pennsylvania where Wolf Hollow was set, where I spent a great deal of my childhood and much of my life visiting where my mother grew up, or My Own Lightning also on that same farm, or Echo Mountain in the mountains of Maine where I go camping, where we have a little camp, or Beyond the Bright Sea, which is set very close to where I live on the Atlantic Ocean, or Candle Island, which is on a tiny fishing village in Maine, off the coast. I could not write a book if I didn't start with a place. And that place, therefore, is like a character in my books. And it's very, very closely related to who I am and how I've lived my life. So, yes, the answer is that that is very, very, very personal and very important to my process.
Your style of writing is in the first person. Do you feel that helps you connect with more with your characters?
The best interviewers I've ever had in my life.
Thank you.
Yes, yes, I discovered that well, I was going to say by accident. It wasn't an accident so much as I had always written in the third person, but when I sat down to write Wolf Hollow, it came out. The first line just came out in the first person unexpectedly. I didn't make a conscious decision. On some level, I suppose I did, but I did not decide emphatically that I would try first person for this book. It just came out that way. And as soon as I began to write in the first person, I realized that it gave me a very intimate connection to my protagonist, Annabelle. It allowed me to slip into her skin and think with her brain and feel with her heart and use her senses to be immersed in her world. And I was thrilled by that intimacy and that very close relationship. And it allowed me to be so involved in the book, so involved in the lives of the characters, especially hers, so involved in that place that I really literally felt as if the book was writing itself. So I have never looked back. I have not written in anything but the first person since then.
You are very attached to your characters. It seems you'd like to spend more time with them. You've written one sequel already. Should we expect any more?
I get that question a lot. It was very hard to write My Own Lightning because Wolf Hollow had a definite end to it, and everything got tied off pretty neatly. But you're absolutely right. I was so closely connected to that character and that place and her story that I felt compelled to go back. Partly too because it was during the pandemic and I wanted to be in that world again, that safe place, that sort of retreat from reality or into a different kind of reality. And so I decided to try it, even though people warned me it would be difficult. And it was really, really hard to do, to make it stand alone, but also to be connected to Wolf Hollow. So I've been asked to write a sequel to Beyond the Bright Sea and Echo Mountain both. And as much as I'd really like to do that. I'm not sure I will, at least not for a while. I have Candle Island coming out, which is a standalone book. I have two other books finished after that, which will wait their turn. But perhaps while I'm waiting for them to be published, I will attempt a sequel to another book, maybe Echo Mountain.
Nice. How much do you focus on getting each and every word just right, and when do you focus on that?
Boy, oh boy, this is fantastic. Um, It's funny. A lot of people just get a first draft down. They call it a rough for a reason. It's got a lot of rough edges, as mine do. But I find that the writing process itself, getting the right words in the right order, creating metaphors that no one's ever hopefully heard before or read before, that is such a delicious part of the recipe that for me it is my motivation to continue. Plot's important, character development is important, all of that is important, but the writing itself is what carries me into the process and keeps me there, it keeps me excited. And so I try to achieve as much of the right words in the right order as possible in my first draft. Sometimes the plot is going very quickly and I'm writing fast and I know I'll go back later and work on the language. And I will regardless. A second draft is going to be tighter and better. But I don't for me it doesn't work to just sort of blurt out any old thing to get it down on paper and fix the whole thing later. It's the process that keeps me going.
Most writers are great observers, which may include eavesdropping. When we interviewed Lemony Snicket, he gave us advice that before you start spying, always have your excuse story ready in advance. What eavesdropping or spying advice do you have for us?
I have been an eavesdropper and a spy my whole life, and people have gotten annoyed with me. We'll be sitting in a restaurant, and I'm not talking to my husband. I'm listening to the people at the table next to me, and I'm trying to figure out their relationship. And he go, "You're being so rude." I'm like, I'm not even really aware I'm doing it, but I say, I'm just fascinated by people and their lives. I could sit in an airport all day long and watch the parade of people go by and imagine their lives, what's going on in their heads, and I say be a spy, be an eavesdropper, pay attention not just to people but to the world. If you're walking in the woods, you as writers are going to notice things nobody else really notices except other artists. You're going to see the tiniest details. You're going to think about how to tell people about them later, how to capture them forever in your memory so that later you can put them in your books. It's not work. It's a state of being, to be observant, to notice things, to pay attention, to eavesdrop, to spy. You talked about having an excuse ready. Is that what you said before of having your story? I say be proud. Just say I'm an artist, and the world is there for me to observe and interpret and collect, harvest, and so that I can put everything that I experience into my work. It's you should be so proud of being that sort of observer.
You are also a poet. Have you ever considered writing a book in verse?
I have, and it's very interesting because I am a poet, and so you would think it would come naturally. But when I try to write a story in verse, it turns into prose very quickly. And to be honest, I haven't read too many books in verse that I feel are truly poetry. They are sort of a cross between prose and poetry, but there's the poetry collection, and then there's the novel, and where they meet in the middle is something different. I suppose a novel in verse is the way to put it, but I tend to veer in one direction or the other. It's hard for me to stay at that seam between the two where they're bound together. I may try again. I think I'm more interested in writing a collection of poems for kids. Um, but I don't write for kids. I write for readers. And yes, I know my audience is young readers, but I think young readers are brilliant. I think they are capable of reading very mature work, very serious work, including poetry that challenges them. So, as much as I love poems for kids, that category, I would just write poems, probably with a character in mind. So, I suppose that could turn into a novel in verse. That was kind of a circular answer. It's because I'm trying to figure it out.
Have you ever wrote a book based on a poem?
Kind of. So I wrote a poem about Wolf Hollow before I ever wrote the book. I didn't think when I sat down to write the book, I didn't think I'm going to take that poem and I'm going to turn it into a longer story. But it had all the same elements. The poem was about um, I don't know if you have read Wolf Hollow, but there are metaphorical wolves in it, and there's some debate about who's the wolf in Wolf Hollow. But it's very autobiographical in a lot of ways. It's my family's story in some ways, not the plot, but definitely the setting and the fact that when my grandfather was a boy, there were a lot of wolves running around, and so the farmers dug these ditches in this little valley, these deep ditches, and threw in the bones of deer. It was during the winter and there wasn't much food for the wolves. And then they went away, left these bones in the ditches, and overnight the wolves jumped in to get the bones and then couldn't get out again. And the farmers would shoot the wolves and cut off their ears for proof and take them to the county and get paid $3 a pair. When my grandfather told me this story, I wrote a poem about it. And then later, when I wrote the novel Wolf Hollow, my character Annabelle goes to her grandfather fictionally and says, "How did Wolf Hollow get its name?" And he tells her this story because that's the place where that all happened decades earlier. And it's a real place where, at the edge of the family farm, where my uncle built a cabin and lived. So, yes, I wrote a poem, and out of that same place and that same story from my family came the novel.
Don't plot out your story ahead of time. You follow your character. Has that ever made you have to go all the way back and make major changes when you realize something new about them?
That's a great question. It's yes, I'm a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. I agree with E.L. Doctorow, the great American novelist, who said writing a novel is like driving a car at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. And the danger is that you'll drive off a cliff in the dark, or you'll get lost. You'll have to backtrack, as you said. It can be scary, it can be frustrating, but it's never boring. And I find that if I try and map out a book in advance, it feels like work. It denies me the opportunity to have the adventure along with my characters and experience the surprises that my characters experience. So, have I ever had to go all the way back to the beginning and completely rewrite it? No, but when I wrote my own lightning during the pandemic, I was so freaked out by what was happening in the world that I had all these ideas rushing at me, and I put them all in the book. They all just sort of came out of nowhere. And later, we had to take a bunch of them out because it was like there were 8 subplots. So we had to pare it down. I say we, my editor and I decided that together. So there was a fair bit of revision to do with that. But no, there's this beautiful thing that happens when I write by the seat of my pants. I get so involved in the book, it's just like living my life. I just I just live the book and alongside my characters, alongside my protagonist, and it just unfolds the way life does. So yeah, I make adjustments. About halfway through, I kind of understand what the book is about, and I have a stronger sort of sense of direction at that point. But now I've never had to go and start again. That would be really hard.
You've done a lot of school visits. What's the funniest or most surprising questions you've gotten?
Wow, funniest or most surprising questions I've gotten. I haven't had too many funny questions. Well, you've been asking me the best questions anyone's ever asked me. So thank you for that. Um, a lot of kids want to know what happens to the characters after the book ends. They desperate to know, especially in Echo Mountain and Beyond the Bright Sea. And I don't know if you've read those, but in Echo Mountain, there's a boy named Larkin and my protagonist Ellie. And there it feels like maybe there could be a romantic relationship coming in the years ahead. And everybody wants to know whether they end up getting married years down the road. And people want to know, well, pretty much all my books that don't have sequels, they want sequels for them because I leave things the way they organically end. And there are loose ends, there are questions. Everything's not tied up in a nice little bow. And so I get a lot of questions. And the funny part of that, of the questions about what happens next, the funny part is that when I say I don't know what happens next, every time the kid asking the question has a brilliant plot idea. So I always say, you write that book. That if you're excited about that possibility, go ahead, write that story. And I think I'll just keep on writing my own. But I love what kids suggest. They're just so smart, so inventive, so creative, so imaginative. It's very, very, very fulfilling to talk with kids about books.
Fans are a thing now. Can you give us your thoughts on them?
Oh, I just finished 5 minutes before meeting with you. I wrote a love letter to librarians for Valentine's Day. A lot of authors have been asked to write a letter and post it on social media by an organization I belong to, which is Authors Against Book Banning. Um, I think book banning is one of the most un-American things anyone could do, and it doesn't matter who it is or why they're banning the books because it happens for all kinds of reasons. Although right now the banning tends to be about book of books that are about people who are different from what some people think we should be. And I am as opposed to that as I am to anything. It is decidedly unpatriotic. It is a fascist thing to do. I'm being very blunt with you because I believe we have to stand up for what we believe in. We have to be brave enough to speak our truth. And my truth is that you don't ban books. You don't ban books, period. People get to choose what they read in this country, and people get to choose what they write in this country. And there may be some exceptions to that rule. You know, there are laws. You don't yell fire in a crowded theater. But I'm talking about creative expression. I'm talking about um, the First Amendment. I'm talking about letting people decide for themselves. So that's my stance on book banning. Don't do it.
We definitely agree.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
Can you tell us a bit about Candle Island?
Sure.
Um,
Um,
mm,
This is the art, so it's got a sticker on it, but it shows, I don't know how well you can see that, but it's got a girl standing at the top of this cliff, and there's a cave at the bottom, and there's somebody standing in the cave. It's right on the ocean. So I told you earlier, I am speaking of school visits. I visit tiny, tiny little schools in Maine. Some of them are on these really small islands. And I love going to these islands. I love going to all the schools. And the schools are so small that sometimes there are only 10 or 15 kids in the entire school, kindergarten through eighth grade. 12 kids. It happens. So when I go to these schools, it's fascinating to me. And the kids are great readers. I decided that after spending enough time in such places, that I would write a book set on one of these islands, a fictitious one, but inspired by islands I'd visited. And I decided again it would be a girl named Lucretia this time, who is my protagonist. She's 12 years old. And since I'm a pantser, I never know what the story's going to be, but it felt to me like she should be coming to this island from somewhere else and that she should have some kind of secret. And she does. She's got a really big secret. She and her mother moved to this island, Candle Island, with a very, very big secret, and they encounter six mysteries there. She herself is the seventh mystery. And when I started writing, I didn't know what those mysteries would be, but they just sort of, it felt like that she was going to solve some mystery. She was going to sort out who she was and where she belonged and what she was brave enough to stand up for. So it's a book about Lucretia and two friends she makes on the island, and then three kids who are on the opposite end of the spectrum, who are cruel and vicious and unkind. So it's kind of like a seesaw. It's a these the my three heroes trying to figure out what to do in the face of injustice. That tends to be a theme in a lot of my books. What to do when you're faced with something truly unjust. What do you do about it?
I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Can you tell us exactly where you were and your reaction when you found out you were won the Newbery Honor?
I was sitting in this chair where I am sitting right now in my writing room, my study. And I wrote Wolf Hollow for adults, or if not for adults, I didn't write it specifically for young readers. It was my agent who said, "Oh, this is a coming of age book. This is a book for young readers." And I said, "Terrific, that's great. That's wonderful. That's a surprise, but that's amazingly great." I was not part of the middle grade world. I was not part of the world of literature for young readers at all. I had written for adults. So I knew what the Newbery was, of course. I had been reading Newbery books my whole life, but it wasn't on my radar. So my editor, my agent said, you should get up early that morning because you might get a phone call. I'm like, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. But I get up early to write. So, if the phone rings, the phone rings. So I'm sitting here in my nightgown at 5 in the morning working on a book. and the phone rings. And I thought, well, nobody calls me at 5 in the morning. What's going on here? So I answered, and it was the Newbery Committee. And it was amazing. It was wonderful. I was so gobsmacked, as my British friends say, that I want to call them now, years later, and apologize for not sounding more excited. But I was just stunned. It was like someone hit me on the head with a shoe. I went, thanks, bye. Wasn't quite that quick, but I just didn't know how to react. I kind of thought maybe it was a joke. So they told me not to tell anyone, because it was going to be announced later that morning. So I thought, okay, I can't tell anybody. And I waited, and the phone rang like 20 minutes later. It was my agent. She said, "Why didn't you call and let us know?" I said, "Because they told me I wasn't supposed to tell anyone." And she laughed hysterically. They call the publishers first. They call all the publishers are up in their pajamas in a hotel room waiting for the phone to ring, just like I was. So I just didn't understand the process. I didn't understand how anything worked. I was so new to this. And I was very, very lucky and blessed to get an honor for Wolf Hollow. It was an incredible surprise and a really wonderful kind of welcome to the world of children's literature.
I think that may have been the key because you weren't writing for kids. You weren't talking down to us.
Not at all. I don't, and I have never, I hope I have never, ever talked down to you. I'll tell you, I sometimes hear from other adults that they think that the kids in my stories are too mature, too intelligent, too brave, too whatever, that it's unrealistic. And I look at them and I say, well, you got to go out and meet some kids because I believe that middle school kids, that all kids, but the kids that read my books primarily, middle grade kids and above, they are mature. You are mature. You are brave. You are intelligent. You are knowledgeable. You are inquisitive. You are creative. You are all the things that my characters are. So I am baffled when adults think that my characters aren't reflective of real kids. I know they are, and I'm looking at two of them right now. So I'm sticking to my guns. I'll never write down to kids. Never. Besides which, I learned how to write by reading books that were challenging. I learned my vocabulary from reading books full of words I didn't know. I learned how to be a brave person by reading about characters who were brave. So I say we give kids as much as you can possibly handle.
What writer has had the most influence on you?
Oh, good question. Maybe well, the books that my mother and father read to me when I was very, very small had a greater influence on me than anything else I've ever read. Not only because they were great books, books like Goodnight Moon or the Peter Rabbit books, or as I got older, books like Tree Grows in Brooklyn or Island of the Blue Dolphins. But the books were read to me before I could read for myself were wonderful and immersive. And the experience of my parents reading to me, my grandmother reading to me, convinced me at a very early age that books and love go together. Books and family go together. Books and everything that's best about me go together. And so all the books I've ever read have taught me a great deal, even the ones I didn't like. But I would say that the books I had read to me were the most influential of all.
What are you writing right now?
That's a good question. Since I have two novels that are done and won't get a turn for a while, and I have two picture books coming out for little children that will also take a while for illustration and all that, I'm kind of slowing down a little and I'm making film. A friend of mine and I are making short animated films. She does the animations and I write the words, and then we add music. And we're about to have a premiere of the first batch of them on the 22nd of this month, and we are going to submit them to film festivals. And this could be a whole new layer to the cake that is my writing life. I never expected to be involved in making film, but that's one thing I want kids to know. As much as you might think of yourself as a writer or a mathematician or a cook or a dancer or whatever you are, there's always room for more. And if you try new things, you may find that you are whether you're good at it or not, you could be good at something you never expected to be good at, but you just may love the thing that you've never tried before. And so try new things. There's always room for more in your life, more layers to your cake. And for me, film right now. I'm writing film. It's great.
How do you think we'll get to watch them?
We're going to start a YouTube channel and we're going to
Oh,
release them one at a time. They're only about 2 minutes long. So the first batch, 14 of them, is only a half an hour. So we're going to release them. They are not, I hate saying for kids. They're not for kids. They're just things that we are creating in response to the things in our lives and in the world that are not obsessing us necessarily, but consuming us in some way. And a lot of it is dark, there's a lot in the world that we're worried about right now. So that's what kind of comes out when we make these. It's very therapeutic. I highly recommend making art if you're anxious or concerned about things. Put it in your work. It's a great way to let it out, let off the steam.
finally, it's time for our Turbo 10. 10 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Okay. Yes.
Number one, what is your favorite phrase to use?
Phrase to use?
Mhm.
Wow, rapid, rapid. Uh, I don't know. No one's ever asked me that before. Um, tell the truth.
Number two, what is one subject you'd love to learn more about?
Ooh, um, welding.
Number three, what is your go-to snack food?
Chips. It's true. Chips.
Number four, what was your favorite book growing up?
Island of the Blue Dolphins.
Number five, if you could teleport somewhere right now, where would you go?
Go somewhere right now?
Teleport.
Ooh. Sorry?
Teleport.
Oh, if I could teleport somewhere through time or space.
No rules.
Either, either. Ooh, okay. Australia.
Number six, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
To make people stop behaving so badly.
Number seven, if what was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Oh boy, I love Bugs Bunny.
Number eight, what is your favorite rainy day activity?
Reading.
Number nine, if you could have any three dinner guests, who would they be?
Oh man. Well, you two, of course.
Yay.
And then maybe if I could go back in time, if I could pull someone out of the past, Beatrix Potter. Why not?
Number 10, what is the best piece of advice you were ever given?
Be yourself.
You were awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you
It has
so
been my, go
and
ahead.
thank you so much for spending time with us. We can't wait to read
It's
your
been
future books.
I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this. You two are so great. I hope you keep doing this. I'm very honored to have been on your show. I really appreciate the chance, and
Thank
I
you.
hope we get to talk again. I'd love to meet you someday.